working as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital for about 5 years when I first met Mr. Jameson. It was a busy Monday morning, and I was assigned to the geriatric ward for my shift. As I made my rounds, I noticed a new patient sitting quietly by the window in room 204. He was an elderly man with a kind face, his eyes twinkling with a mix of curiosity and wisdom. "Good morning, Mr. Jameson," I said, checking his chart. "How are you feeling today?" "Call me Henry," he replied with a warm smile. "I'm doing just fine, thank you. And you are?" "I'm Nurse Emily," I said, returning his smile. "If you need anything, just let me know." Over the next few weeks, I found myself drawn to Henry's room during my breaks. He had a way of making you feel at ease with his gentle demeanor and fascinating stories. He told me about his childhood adventures, his time in the military, and his years working as a hospital administrator in another city. Henry and I developed a close bond. He had a wealth of knowledge and life experiences that he shared generously. I looked forward to our conversations, and he seemed to enjoy having someone to talk to. Despite his age, Henry was sharp and observant, often noticing things that others missed. One evening, as I was tidying up his room, Henry looked at me with a serious expression. "Emily, can I tell you something?" "Of course, Henry. What's on your mind?" "There's something strange about this hospital," he said, lowering his voice. "I've heard whispers, seen shadows in the hallways at night. It's almost as if the building itself is alive." I laughed nervously. "It's an old hospital, Henry. Sometimes the pipes creak and the wind howls. Nothing to worry about." Henry nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Just be careful, Emily. There's more to this place than meets the eye." The disappearance. One morning, I arrived at work to find Henry's room empty. His bed was neatly made, and there was no sign of his belongings. I checked the schedule, but there was no record of him being discharged. "Hey, Jess," I called to my colleague at the nurse's station. "Do you know where Mr. Jameson went?" Jess looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Who?" "Henry Jameson, the elderly man in room 204. He's been here for weeks." Jess shook her head. "Emily, there's been no patient by that name in room 204. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "I'm positive. I've been talking to him every day." Jess frowned. "Let me check the records." She typed on her computer and then looked up at me, her face pale. "There's no record of a Henry Jameson being admitted to this hospital. Are you sure you're okay?" I was stunned. How could there be no record of him? I had seen him, talked to him, listened to his stories. Determined to find answers, I decided to investigate further. I spent the next few days searching for any trace of Henry. I checked the security footage, but there was no sign of him entering or leaving the hospital. I spoke to other staff members, but no one seemed to remember him. It was as if he had never existed. Frustrated and confused, I decided to dig into the hospital's history. I visited the archives and started going through old records. As I combed through the files, I came across something that made my heart stop. There was a picture of a young man named Henry Jameson, taken over 50 years ago. The caption read, "Missing Hospital Administrator, last seen in 1968. I couldn't believe my eyes. The man in the photo was the spitting image of the Henry I had known, just younger. How was this possible? I needed answers. Determined to uncover the truth, I continued to investigate. I spent my breaks and off hours combing through the hospital, looking for any clues. One evening, as I was exploring the basement, I noticed a small, hidden door behind a stack of old boxes. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, I pushed the door open. Inside was a small, dimly lit room filled with old furniture and dusty files. As I sifted through the papers, I found a journal. It belonged to Henry Jameson. The journal detailed his work at the hospital and his growing concerns about strange occurrences. He mentioned hearing voices, seeing shadows, and feeling an oppressive presence. The last entry was dated October 1968, the day he went missing. It simply read, "I fear I am not alone. If anyone finds this, know that I tried to uncover the truth." I felt my legs turn to jelly. Henry had been right all along. There was something sinister about the hospital, and he had been trying to expose it. I took the journal to Father Thomas, a local priest who was known for his interest in the supernatural. He listened intently as I recounted my experiences and showed him the journal. "Emily, it sounds like Henry's spirit has been trapped in the hospital for all these years," Father Thomas said. "He may have been trying to warn you about the dark forces at play." "But why was he able to communicate with me?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and sadness. "Perhaps he sensed that you would listen, that you would believe him," Father Thomas replied. "Spirits often seek out those who are open to their presence." With Father Thomas's help, we performed a cleansing ritual in the hidden room. As we recited prayers and sprinkled holy water, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I hoped that Henry's spirit could finally find rest. After the ritual, the strange occurrences in the hospital seemed to stop. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the staff and patients felt more at ease. I continued my work, but I never forgot Henry and the bond we had shared. One day, as I was walking through the hospital's garden, I felt a gentle breeze and heard a faint whisper. "Thank you, Emily." I looked around, but there was no one there. I smiled, knowing that Henry's spirit had found peace and that he was watching over me. Years later, I still think about Henry and the lessons he taught me. I've learned to trust my instincts and to listen to the whispers of the past. The hospital has since been renovated, and the hidden room has been turned into a small memorial for Henry Jameson, honoring his dedication and courage. As I walk through the halls of St. Mary's, I feel a sense of pride knowing that I helped to uncover the truth and bring peace to a restless spirit. And every now and then, when I see a shadow or hear a whisper, I smile, knowing that Henry is still with me, guiding and protecting me from the shadows in the ward. It had been nearly 15 years since I last saw or spoke to Lindsay Carter, my best friend from high school. Life took us in different directions after graduation, and we gradually lost touch. So, when I received a friend request from her on social media, I was both surprised and delighted. Lindsay had been a significant part of my teenage years, and reconnecting with her felt like rediscovering a lost piece of my past. We began chatting online, reminiscing about old times and catching up on each other's lives. Lindsay told me she had moved back to our hometown after years of living in the city and suggested we meet up to catch up properly. She invited me to her family home, the same house I had visited countless times during our high school years. "Let's meet this Saturday," she wrote. "It'll be just like old times." I agreed, excited yet slightly nervous. I hadn't been to Lindsay's house in over a decade, and I wondered how much had changed. The drive back to our hometown was filled with nostalgia. The familiar landmarks and winding roads brought back a flood of memories. I thought about the countless sleepovers, the late-night talks, and the secrets we had shared. Lindsay and I had been inseparable, and I regretted how easily we had drifted apart. As I pulled into the driveway of Lindsay's family home, I was taken aback. The house, once well kept and bustling with life, now stood in a state of disrepair. The lawn was overgrown, the paint was peeling, and the windows looked dusty and neglected. It was hard to imagine that this was the same place where we had spent so many carefree days. I stepped out of the car and approached the front door, noticing that the mailbox was overflowing with unopened letters. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. After waiting for a few minutes, I decided to check with the neighbors. I walked over to the house next door and rang the doorbell. An elderly woman answered, her eyes widening in recognition. "Hello," I began. "I'm looking for Lindsay Carter. She invited me over, but it seems like no one is home." The woman's expression turned somber. "Lindsay Carter? Oh dear, you must be mistaken. Lindsay went missing years ago." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, missing?" "It was about 10 years ago," she explained. "Lindsay disappeared without a trace. The police investigated, but they never found any leads. Her family moved away soon after. This house has been vacant ever since." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "But I've been chatting with her online. She invited me here." "That can't be possible. Are you sure it was Lindsay?" I nodded, feeling a creeping sense of unease. "Yes, I'm sure." The woman sighed. "I don't know what to tell you, dear. Be careful. This doesn't sound right." Confused and unsettled, I returned to my car and pulled out my phone. I reread the messages from Lindsay, trying to make sense of the situation. Something was definitely wrong. I decided to call the police and report what I had discovered. An officer arrived shortly after and took my statement. He seemed genuinely concerned and promised to look into the matter. In the meantime, he advised me to stay away from the house and contact him if I received any further communication from Lindsay. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I continued to receive messages from Lindsay, but they took on a more insistent tone, urging me to meet her at various locations. I ignored them and forwarded everything to the police. A week later, I received a call from the officer handling the case. "We've identified the person behind the messages," he said. "It seems someone hacked into Lindsay's old social media account and has been using it to lure people to that house. We've arrested the suspect." Relief washed over me, but I still had questions. Who was it, and why? The officer hesitated before answering. It was a man named David Harris. He has a history of stalking and has been under investigation for other similar incidents. He targeted you because he knew you were close to Lindsay and thought he could use that connection to manipulate you. I felt a mix of anger and disgust. What about Lindsay? Is there any news on her? The officer sighed. I'm afraid not. Her case remains unsolved. But thanks to your vigilance, we were able to prevent another potential tragedy. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about Lindsay. The joy of reconnecting had turned into a nightmare, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss for my friend. I visited the police station to thank the officers for their help, and to see if there was anything I could do to support the ongoing investigation into Lindsay's disappearance. One of the detectives suggested I reach out to a support group for families and friends of missing persons. Reluctantly, I attended a meeting and found solace in connecting with others who understood my pain. Through their stories, I learned about the strength and resilience needed to cope with such a loss. Months later, just as I was beginning to find some semblance of normalcy, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a private investigator who had been looking into Lindsay's case on behalf of her family. "We've found a lead," the investigator said. "There have been recent sightings of a woman matching Lindsay's description in a small town a few states away. Her family has asked if you'd be willing to join us in following up on this lead." Hope and fear surged within me. Of course, I'll do whatever it takes. The journey to the small town was filled with anticipation. When we arrived, we met with locals who had reported seeing a woman who resembled Lindsay. They described her as quiet and reclusive, living on the outskirts of town. With the help of the investigator, we tracked down the address. As we approached the modest cottage, my heart raced. Could it really be Lindsay? We knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it opened slowly. There stood a woman, her eyes filled with a mixture of recognition and uncertainty. It was Lindsay, but she looked different, older, wearier, but unmistakably her. "Lindsay," I said, my voice trembling. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Emily, it's really you." The next few hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Lindsay explained that she had left our hometown to escape a toxic relationship and had cut off all contact to protect herself. She had no idea that her disappearance had caused so much pain and confusion. We contacted the police and her family, and soon Lindsay was reunited with her loved ones. The relief and joy were palpable, and we spent the next few days catching up and rebuilding our friendship. In the end, what began as a seemingly innocent reconnection on social media led to the uncovering of a dangerous situation and the eventual reunion with a long-lost friend. The experience taught me the importance of vigilance and the power of hope. Lindsay and I stayed close, cherishing the second chance we had been given. Our bond, once lost, was now stronger than ever. And as we moved forward, we carried with us the lessons learned from our ordeal, forever grateful for the unexpected twists that had ultimately brought us back together.